Welcome back to the Podium Performance Podcast, where we talk about physical performance. I'm your host, Coach Tony. You can find this podcast on YouTube or on iTunes and Spotify podcasts. In the last episode, I spoke about work capacity, stamina, and key metrics. Today, I'm going to talk about flexibility and range of motion, what these are, why they're important, and some ways to improve things around them. For those watching on YouTube, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. For those listening on iTunes or Spotify podcasts, remember to subscribe. So now let's dive right in. While flexibility and range of motion often get used interchangeably, they have some distinct differences. Flexibility has to do with the muscles and their ability to lengthen and shorten. On the other hand, range of motion has to do with the joints and how much they can bend. As strange as this might sound, a person can have great flexibility and garbage range of motion, or vice versa, having excellent range of motion and dog shit flexibility. However, they do directly influence one another. The combination of these two is essentially what allows us to move into and out of both simple and complicated positions efficiently, safely, and injury-free. First, I'm going to talk a bit about flexibility. Our muscles are made up of bundles of muscle fibers. We know that our muscles contract and stretch. Flexibility, to put it simply, is how much these fibers can stretch before one of two things happens. The first being that the body says no more and stops, preventing it from going any further, or the second being an injury. We have a few different types of flexibility that can be boiled down to two types: static and dynamic flexibility. Static flexibility, just think of when you bend over to touch your toes. At a certain point, many people will need to round their back in order to complete the movement, while others can seemingly fold in half. This shows the flexibility of the hamstrings and glutes. The reason that many will have to round the back to finish the movement is they have reached the limit of the flexibility in their hamstrings and glutes. Holding this position is an easy demonstration of static flexibility. Now you may notice that you can either bounce into or you can have some motion going into a stretch that you have a little extra flexibility. That would be dynamic flexibility. Just to keep things as simple as possible here, this is mostly due to the elastic quality that muscles and tendons have, allowing them to stretch a little bit more when they are moving. One reason for this is that it is a self-protective measure that allows a joint to decelerate instead of just coming to a sudden stop. And when you come to a sudden abrupt stop, that's when bad things can happen. Those in the athletic world or have seen athletes warming up will see some of these other movements like leg swings, arm swings. Now, these athletes wouldn't be able to easily get their limb to be as flexible as they are this way if they were to just reach and hold the position, because as I just touched on, you're more flexible dynamically or in motion. Range of motion, on the other hand, is about the joints and how much the joint bends, and this would be measured in degrees. Therapists and researchers will use a tool called a goniometer to measure this. All this does is measure the joint angle accurately. It really is just that simple. But there are factors that are going to massively influence this range. One of them is body and muscle size. I'll use the knee as an example here because of how easy it is for us to picture it in our minds or to take a look at. When you bend your knee, the full range of motion is going from a fully extended knee or locked out, so a straight leg, and bending until the hamstring and calf are in contact with one another. So full range of motion for two different people is going to be a bit different based upon the size of their legs. A person who has slimmer legs with less muscle mass and overall size will have a larger range of motion than a person who has tree trunks for thighs with massive hamstrings and calves. This is similar to those who carry a lot of excess fat mass as well, because that extra tissue literally gets in the way of you being able to bend your knee. And this prevents you from then achieving full range of motion. Now, there are many other factors that will influence range of motion. One of the biggest will be the flexibility of the muscles involved. The reason for this is that in order for a joint to bend, one of the muscles involved has to stretch. We all know those people who have the flexibility of a tree branch where it looks like they're going to break because they're so stiff. So they're typically unable to achieve full range of motion because of this. A lot of time, this is caused by a lack of activity, or as I call it, laziness to take care of your own body. Another massively impactful influence on range of motion is injuries. Now, the topic of injuries is going to be covered in their own episodes because of how vast they are and the depth required to actually go into them, respectfully to each type of injury and classification. But for this overview, I'll just mention a few issues from injuries. Two of the biggest aspects that come from injuries influencing range of motion are going to be the inflammation and scar tissue formation. Inflamed tissue swells up, which can restrict movement, especially if there's a lot of excess fluid buildup or an edema. While for scar tissue formation, you're looking at the tissue itself losing pliability and its ability to move and stretch properly. And now the last major influence on range of motion I'll mention in this overview are chronic medical issues. Things like arthritis can prevent you from achieving full range of motion. Bone spurs can do this, as can tendinitis, as the swelling from this can reduce the elasticity of the tendon, which reduces flexibility, and then that knocks on to reduce your range of motion. We also have a few different types of range of motion. We have passive and active. Active you can control, while passive you are not in control. By this I mean that active range of motion, you can take yourself through certain ranges of motion before things stop. As for passive, when I said you are not in control, that is because it requires an outside force or person to see how far you can actually go. You're literally being forced to go further than you would normally be comfortably able to go. These you'll see a lot of times with a therapist testing out range of motion issues and imbalances between sides for asymmetries, but there are other ways of checking this. So why is flexibility and range of motion so important for performance in all ways? Your body needs to be able to move, and when you're doing different movements in sport, or even life places you into weird positions, you have to be able to get into and out of that position. Sometimes it's needed to be fast, explosive, dynamic, with even collisions involved. And sometimes it's slower and sustained. Think about a hockey goalie that needs to get down into the splits to sprawl to make a save, or a weightlifter catching a snatch overhead. Even a middle-aged parent chasing around their 8-year-old is going to require potentially quick, little, fast movements in order to get into and out of positions. And if you're not able to do these efficiently with the required range of motion, your risk for injury goes up. Now, the only prize that you're going to get when you can't get around here is just think of the fuck around and find out matrix. If you're not flexible enough, but you're forcing yourself into positions, well, you're now fucking around, and the more you do this, the more you're going to find out with an injury happening. Remember, different sports and vocations will require more or less of these, and yes, it can be extremely specific, including extremely specific to body parts. For example, the rotator cuff for a baseball pitcher is going to require more range of motion and flexibility than that of a hockey player. So how can we improve upon both of these? Well, first thing I'll brief over is the improvement in flexibility, because it will have direct carryover to your range of motion. Stretching, it is actually that simple, and the most effective way for longer term range of motion improvements. Now is where we get into a few different types of stretching. Some you can do relatively easily on your own, while others you need some, let's just call it, help. First off, you have static stretching. This is that type of stretching where you sit and you reach, you hold position, and you feel the muscle stretch. It can feel a little bit painful and uncomfortable. You want to get to that point where it's uncomfortable, because that is the point at which you're starting to cause the tissue to change. In order for you to actually get the adaptations from stretching, it needs to be done consistently. And for the most part, you should be holding a stretch for anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds. The minimum to start out, I would say, for holding any stretch would be 30 seconds, and then moving up to 60 seconds. Now, we always look at the extremes of this with a gymnast, where These girls can sit there in a split position and fold themselves into a pancake. Don't expect to necessarily be able to do that right away, and in many cases, ever in your life. Remember, they've been stretching and doing that since they were a toddler, and they've kept that flexibility, the range of motion, the pliability of their tissues to be able to do that. Why do I say holding 30 to 60 seconds? Because if you hold less than that, as I've mentioned and touched on, our muscles have an elastic quality to them. So they like to return back to their shortened or their natural position, which for a lot of people is going to be slightly shortened. In order to get the muscles to elongate, to relax, to stretch out, you need to hold it so that that elastic response doesn't kick in and prevent the muscle from actually lengthening and being able to relax into that position. Also, we have this part of our muscles called the Golgi tendon apparatus. This thing can be a bit of a bugger because it can prevent you from actually achieving it, because it's an inhibitory complex that we have. When you get to a certain position, it's going to respond by saying, nope, I don't want to get there, I'm not strong or comfortable there. By holding for 30 to 60 seconds, you start to trick the body into relaxing into it and realizing, I can achieve this new position now. And in order for you to get that new position, it has to be to the point of being uncomfortable and borderline having a little bit of even pain while you're stretching. The next type of stretching is dynamic stretches. As I touched on before, this is where you're moving. Think leg swings, think arm circles. By moving through this greater range of motion, the muscle is going to be lengthening and shortening as you're going through the movement. Your leg kind of looks like a golf club. Anytime a soccer player or a football kicker goes to kick the ball, they're doing a bit of a dynamic stretch on the way back before coming through. This allows the body to go through and have a little bit of movement. It somewhat kind of lubricates the joints up as well, and increases a little bit of, because it's in an active role, you're going to get a little bit of heat going on. And this heat allows the muscles to relax and lengthen a little bit more. One thing about muscles is if they're a little bit warmer, they're going to be a little bit more pliable, which means they're going to have a little bit of extra flexibility naturally because they're relaxed. They're in their more natural temperature for performing. A cold muscle doesn't like to really stretch, whereas a warm muscle likes to stretch and relax. The third type of stretching I'm going to talk about is loaded stretches. So this is something where you basically need to be either in the gym or be using your body weight to be doing with certain muscles. One of the easiest ones to think about here is a calf stretch. Now, one way you can do a loaded calf stretch is doing a single leg calf stretch where you're just standing either at the edge of the stairs and you let your heels hang off and drop down as far as they can. And a way to make this a loaded stretch would be do it with one leg. Since how you're not used to that, at times just that single leg is, with all your body weight on it, is enough to have a loaded stretch. You can also do this by having actual weight room machines take you into a stretched position. How this happens is you load up a little bit of weight, you go to the bottom of the range of motion, and you sit there again for 30 to 60 seconds. All a loaded stretch really is a static stretch with some extra weight pushing down. It's somewhat forcing the muscles to stretch out. And now for the types of stretching where you need a little bit of help. First, we have proprioceptive neurofacilitation stretches, PNF stretching. So this is done with a partner where they push you into the stretch, they hold for about 10 seconds, then you push back against them and they give you a little bit of give, and then as you breathe out, they push you back into that stretch again, where you're going to get a little bit of extra range of motion. You're going to get a little bit of extra flexibility. Since how you just did you just did the stretch, then you activated the muscle, now you stretched it again, there should be a little bit of extra flexibility that's gained after doing that passive, active, passive cycle. You can do this for the hamstrings, the quads, you can do this for pretty much every muscle in the body. One of the best places for doing this is actually around the shoulders with the chest. since how a lot of people lack flexibility in their chest, they're not able to open up all the way and get back, having a partner with one hand on the back, one hand kind of cradling the arm, pulling back a little bit at the elbow joint while keeping the arm nice and straight, holding that, it's a very easy way to help stretch out muscles that are typically chronically a little bit on the tight side. And then we have fascia stretch therapy, FST. This is another one that's done with a partner where you're basically sitting on a table, the floor, and the partner takes you through different stretches in different positions where they're focusing not necessarily just on the muscle, but on that wrapping around our muscles called fascia and helping that to somewhat lengthen and stretch a little bit in different ways. Sometimes you need to be taken into different angles to let something relax. Now, are these going to feel good? First time, probably not. But over time, your flexibility and your range of motion will improve. So the reason that stretching will directly improve your range of motion so effectively is that it allows muscles to stretch and relax into longer positions, which then turns off the inhibitory processes and responses by the body, as I was mentioning in the static stretching part. If you don't have the requisite flexibility to achieve a range of motion, the body likes to protect itself and it's going to prevent you from getting there. Now, all forms of stretching will have a bit of an immediate, transient effect that is short-lived, but if you're consistent and diligent with it, you get long-term, chronically beneficial benefits. Each different performance domain will require more or less flexibility training. A power lifter will need way less than a weightlifter or a gymnast, but there are benefits for everybody to stretch. Some of the added benefits you can get from stretching include better blood flow and nutrient transfer within the tissue, improving the suppleness of the tissue in the muscles and connective tissue, reducing the buildup of scar tissue, reducing your overall stress that you carry. I think a lot of people carry a lot of stress in their shoulders and in their necks and whatnot. Well, by stretching a little bit, you can relax a little bit. And also you get improved joint lubrication and joint health. The connective tissue's health improves. Part of that's going to be from, okay, you improve blood flow. Improved blood flow brings nutrients. Nutrients keep tissues healthy. So that covers our overview of our overview of flexibility, range of motion, and how they can correlate to performance in all areas of life. Now, if you're on the hunt for a new high-quality protein and other supplements, you can use code WRESTLING10 for 10% off with ATP Labs at atplabs.com. Thank you for listening. You can find me on Instagram at WrestlingPerformance and online at www.wrestlingperformance.ca. Remember to subscribe, and thank you for listening to the Podium Performance Podcast. As I continue to cover the final foundations of performance, the next episode will be on body size, its impacts on performance, and how you are at times genetically predisposed for certain tasks, even some against your will.